Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote, "Our highest assurance of the goodness of Providence seems to me to rest in the flowers. All other things, our powers, our desires, our food, are all really necessary for our existence in the first instance. But this rose is an extra. Its smell and its color are an embellishment of life, not a condition of it. It is only goodness which gives extras, and so I say again that we have much to hope from the flowers." Of course, as someone with a degree in horticulture, I know the flower is a condition of the rose's life. It's how the plant has sex and creates more roses. Shocking, I know. But I deeply admire the writers who, in a time when the world seemed to be going entirely to the machines, spoke up for the beauties of nature. From 1810 to the end of the century, the public mind was at once intensely excited and intensely anxious about the new discoveries coming every day. Throughout the Victorian era of the Western world, there was a tug between the relentless march to explore, conquer, make more money, be more industrious, and the wish to stop, take a breath, and smell the flowers for an afternoon, or even half an hour. The language of flowers was one emblem of this constant friction between the exciting prospects of the modern world and the sense that the gentler things of life should not be trodden underfoot. I'll be discussing the European and American language of flowers, though I recommend looking into the Japanese and Turkish versions on your own. They're fascinating in their own right, and, in the case of the Japanese variety, much better codified and more sane than the European type. So what was the language of flowers? Who was using it? And exactly what for? As with so many things in Western society, the answer is a mix of discoveries, misunderstandings, forgeries, dreams, hopes, thefts, and appropriations, all braided together. The first floral language book that we would recognize came about in France, when a lady using the pen name Charlotte de la Tour published Les Langues de Fleurs at the end of 1819. But the story goes back much further than that. The language of flowers has its roots in Greek texts and pagan folklore of Europe, which tended to be extremely localized. People used common plant symbols in daily life. Plant seeds after the hawthorn tree has bloomed, because that's the end of hard frost. Campanula turns towards the sun, therefore it marks loyalty. As Christianity began to infiltrate these areas, new associations were made. The pure lily of the Virgin Mary, the clinging wallflower representing loyalty to the church. This general doctrine of signatures was popular and spread by word of mouth throughout the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. In the way you might know Michael Jackson without ever hearing one of his songs, everyone in that culture knew a pocketful of floral lore. But by the 18th century, the flowery Renaissance gave way to the hard-nosed Enlightenment, and all that was frivolous fell out of fashion. It took exploration to bring wonder back to the Western world. As technology improved and travel became more possible throughout the 18th and 19th century, travelers returned with stories of the East and the strange and wondrous customs they saw there. You have to put this attitude in perspective. The average middle-class man in Europe had only read a few passages about places like Turkey or Morocco in Marco Polo or the writings of Pliny. The average lower-class person had trouble reading and couldn't afford books. There was no internet. This created a situation where the reader was completely dependent on traveling writers telling the truth, and they tended to accept what they read. The readers weren't necessarily as credulous or xenophobic as they appear to us today. They really had no other frame of reference for places they'd never seen and would probably never see. The writers who actually did the traveling, on the other hand, it's harder to give them a pass. You can see how easily the information vacuum existing in the Western popular mind made it for unscrupulous or misinformed writers to put down anything they wanted about other cultures, adding their own thoughts and sentiments to their observations. And they did. There's a lot of great stuff out there about avoiding cultural appropriation and exoticism. I'm going to be frank, this time period is the reason. In these writings, Turkey became one great garden of sensual delight, and most of Asia became a placid, inscrutable place where nothing ever moved. Here's a sample. I'm quoting from the book, The Language of Flowers, A History, by Beverly Seton, which you really need as a solid source of research on this topic. Ahem. In Eastern lands they talk in flowers, and they tell in a garland their loves and cares. Each blossom that blooms in their garden bowers, on its leaves a mystic language bears. Yeah, it was pretty bad. These informed writers could assign pretty much anything to the mysterious East, and equip it with a pedigree. And plenty of European writers did. Lady Mary Wortley Montagu wrote the Turkish Embassy Letters in 1763. In those letters, she wrote of the Turkish custom of selam, which she described as a symbolic code making it possible for sweethearts to send messages without ever inking their fingers, by sending a handful of objects whose Turkish names rhymed with the sentiment they felt, wrapped in a scarf to their intended. She was mostly wrong about her ideas. The word selam, you may recognize it from the term salam aleikum in Arabic. It simply means hello. But the concept sprouted when it reached European soil all the same. It took exotic Eastern connotations to get people interested in the plants outside their own front doors again. For the aspirational classes, the idea of putting poetry and the new luxury of exotic blooms, brought from far-off places to be grown in modern glass houses, was deeply appealing for several reasons. Carl Linnaeus had finished creating the binomial nomenclature naming system that could accurately describe every plant known in 1753. Technology was improving, and it was possible, with the use of glass houses and Wardian cases, to have roses in winter for a price, and keep rare blooms from around the world alive despite European weather. Every year, some new and amazing plant was being found in strange places. Amaryllis, orchids, and lantana delighted the gardeners, and quinine and other drugs were pouring into pharmacopoeias. Many expeditions deliberately set out to acquire new scientific knowledge, and botanists were adventurers. Their stories were exciting. It should be remembered that exploration was regarded as a key element in economic development, directly tied up with naval and military operations and trade. Terrible things were happening in other countries. But to the English person in the street, it seemed like their country was thriving. The world was providing new wonders every day, and a lot of those wonders were plants. Botany was particularly exciting for women, because it was seen as one of the few areas they actually got to do scientific work in. Not the big trips around the world, of course, but at least they were allowed to read books on botany and horticulture without disfavor. These were noble pursuits, and women latched on to botany in droves. Flowers also allowed people in this rigid society to discuss the risque in safety through poetry. For example, Thomas Carew compares his mistress's body to a delicious paradise in which he, the bee, fills his bag with honey. Her various charms are seen as flowers, the rosebuds in their perfumed bed, violet knots, and finally the veil of lilies. His last stop. Need he say exactly where he is? But were they really passing flowers around between themselves and their admirers, using a codex to send messages? Not exactly. For one thing, there was no single language of flowers. Some writers tried to say that in the Golden Age, whenever that was, there was a perfect language in flowers, and implied their book was the perfect version. Buy the book, buy the book. Here's an example from Thomas Miller's Poetical Language of Flowers. It was in that age when the golden mornings of the early world were unclouded by the smoke of cities, when the odor from thousands of untrodden flowers mingled with the aroma of old forests, and the gentlest wind that ever tried its wings flapped its way through the vast realms of sleeping fragrance, that love first set out to discover the long-lost language of flowers. For there had been rumor in the olden world that, before the winged lovers of earth's first daughters left their watch beside the star-beaconed battlements of heaven, and gave up all their glory for the heart of woman, the buds and blossoms held sweet converse together, and that many a time, when the nightingale ushered in the twilight with her song, voices from the flowers had made low response, among the glades and rose-gilded pastures in the garden of paradise. To which the cockney flower seller down in the street would say, "Blow that for a game of soldiers." The common people knew there was no original language of flowers. Some of these plants had 4 or 5 different meanings, one from Greek sources, one from English folklore, one from French folklore, and one from what some writer decided to say. There were some general rules followed on how people thought about plants. A plant received its connotations through either metaphor, tradition, or allusion. The metaphors were things like the plant's habit. Does it creep? Does it turn towards the sun? Does it hide poison? Digitalis is marked as the flower of deceit for this reason, and oleander as the flower of danger. Both are pretty flowers that hide poison. Scent in a flower was linked to soul or substance in a person, so a lovely plant with no scent earned duplicitous meanings. Dahlia translates as, "I was only flirting," and camellia can mean, "You are cold." Tradition tended to follow classical Greek sources. For some reason, the Europeans were happy to talk about their medieval kings, but not about their medieval folklore. Given how many religious battles there had been in cultural memory, maybe we can see why. Much safer to go with the Greeks than to get into arguments about popes. So from Greek sources, Narcissus becomes the flower of ego, and Aster earns the title Flower of Fidelity. The allusions usually came out of more anecdotal sources. For instance, the name begonia was given to the plant in honor of the governor of Haiti at the time, one Mr. Begon. But in Europe, the closeness to the Latin word bego, caution, was soon spotted, and the poor begonia got handed to people being warned that they were in danger of a scandal. Candytuft was often used as a mustard substitute for the poor, and so it is used as the flower of indifference, meaning the person involved couldn't tell the quality article from the inferior version. I think it translates as "get lost" in modern terms. Cultural differences also cropped up. While the French wrote the first Language of Flowers books, the English were very nervy of French openness and sex positivity, as well as that whole Napoleon tried to take over the world thing. In fact, a great sample of English thinking comes from the introduction to The Floral Emblem by Dr. Henry Phillips, where he writes, "In this symbolical assemblage, the author has carefully avoided all indelicate allusions or double entendre that would be offensive to modesty. His object has been to establish a settled collection of floral emblems, and to render them as amusing and as decorative dress of the poet, and the sparkling garb of wit will allow. And although he presents a flower to fill every cap, none are personally intended, but the whole are offered for the selection of the wearer. And should weeds be discovered where flowers are expected, he flatters himself that they will be few, and that those few will be found inoffensive. For although his work may be considered more adapted for amusement than for utility, he would not willingly offer entertainment through the assistance of immorality." In his version, the flower jasmine loses its meaning of voluptuous pleasure and becomes amiability. Different sources gave different meanings, and that could create quite a problem. For instance, Miss Seton writes, for example, a young man might send a girl a jonquil, which, according to the language of flowers explained in Flora's Interpreter, means, I desire a return of affection. But if the girl used the other method of reading the flower, the one given in Flora Fortuna, and if she received the flower on a Sunday, the first day of the week, on the 19th day of the month, and her temperament was lymphatic, she would add up 21, look up number 21 in the meaning list, and find this verse. The last link is broken that bound me to thee. The words thou hast spoken have rendered me free. What a mess! And after the reputable works created by people like Elizabeth Wirt, Dr. Phillips, and Madame Latour, came a plethora of hack jobs and copycats who cribbed whole sentences from others at their whim in order to create cheap gift books for the less affluent readers. Imagine the confusion. The language of flowers was used less to decide what to hand to someone else, as it was to decide what to show on one's own person. From the 1820s on, flowers became affordable enough to decorate the buttonholes and hats of middle-class men, and the hair, dresses, and coats of ladies on a daily basis. In an image-conscious society, what you wore spoke volumes, and it was important to attend to their meanings. For instance, a young lady in 1862 was threatened with expulsion from a ball. She was far too young to wear open red roses in her hair, and it was a scandal. The language was also a pastime for genteel ladies of the upper middle class, and an awful lot of books designed to be given as gifts were put out. With their passages of poetry and legend, touch of classy science, and gorgeous illustrations, these books were often designed as parlor books, what we now call coffee table books. They were read for leisure and enjoyment, rather than used as a method of escaping Mamma's watchful eye to send a message to your beau. After all, you have to remember, Mamma could read the book too. Games of floral divination were very popular as well, and to pass an evening, many games were created. A number of volumes have survived detailing them, including The Floral Fortune Teller, Oracle du Fleur, and Among the Flowers. If this interests you, I have created a floral fortune-telling game and book detailing the history of how a number of flowers reached Europe from around the world and how they gained their place in the language of flowers. This fully illustrated book and deck set are available on Amazon. Just type in Olivia Wiley, W-I-L-I-E, or click the links attached. I hope you've enjoyed The Language of Flowers.